Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Bultbird and Kemp's webinar series, Growing with a Spinal Cord Injury. Before we get started, please kindly note that this session is being recorded. Your cameras and mics have been turned off. This is the first session in our webinar series, with our focus today being on engaging with physical activity, a young SCI person's perspective. We are very grateful to be joined by Ella Archer. She is the perfect person for this subject. Ella was spinally injured at birth. She knows a lot about physical activity as she is a physical activity advisor at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. She is also a former GB wheelchair basketball European champion and now continues to play wheelchair basketball and wheelchair rugby. Ella also runs her own exercise sessions. Ella has very kindly agreed to share her experiences today, and we will be having a roundtable discussion. We will pause as and when appropriate to ask any questions raised so as to not interrupt the flow. Please therefore place any questions in the chat function. Ella has very kindly said that she's happy to talk about anything. Thank you, Ella, for joining us.
Hiya.
So to start things off, Ella, could you maybe give us a little more insight into yourself as to how you sustained your injury, your level of injury, just to give some background?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll try and give as brief background as possible. But so I am Ella. I am 28 years old. And I, as mentioned, Rihanna mentioned, I was born with a spinal cord injury. So I've always been paralyzed, always been in a wheelchair. Basically what happened was 5 days before I was born in my mum's womb, I just stopped kicking. There was no rhyme or reason for it. It wasn't anything my mum had done. It wasn't her fault. Very unusual situation, but basically it turned out when I was born that I'd had a blood clot in the spinal cord, about the lesions T1 to T4. They kind of roughly estimated at the time. It was hard to tell at such an early age, but yeah, that was what they kind of estimated at the time. So it meant I had no feeling or movement from my chest downwards, which was a bit of a shock to my mum and dad. I have two older sisters, so I'd grown up with two older sisters, but they hadn't had ever experienced anything with disability before me. So it was a whole new learning curve for us all. Obviously, I learned growing up with them and they learned growing up with me. So yeah, it wasn't an easy ride. It was quite tricky at times. Obviously, every spinal cord injury has its challenges, but I am very, very grateful to my mum and dad because they are so incredibly positive and was so determined that I would never be treated any differently to my sisters. So for example, I never got any sympathy. I basically grew up with three mums and my sisters were just as much mummy as my mums were. So there was no excuses. I was always made to do everything they were going to do. And my mum was very determined that I was going to go to a mainstream school, and that I would kind of make friends with able-bodied people and disabled people, because that is a really important part of life, I think.
So on that point then, in relation to the physical activity, when you were in school, can you talk to us a bit more about kind of your PE classes, how you engaged at school with PE classes?
Absolutely. So I was very, very lucky, I'd say, to have a very positive experience with PE in school, which I know is not always the case. I know that even Channel 4 are doing a little documentary on this as we speak at the moment, talking about PE for wheelchair users in schools particularly. So it is a challenge, but I got very, very lucky. I got my schools, both the schools I went to, both primary and secondary, had the very same thinking as my mum. And I'm not sure if that's because she forced it upon them or if that was the school's thinking anyway, but they were all determined that I would definitely still take part in PE and do everything that everyone else is doing in the class. So for example, at primary school, I loved sport and I joined the netball club, which I think channeled my love for basketball eventually. But I joined the after school netball club and it was taken by the caretaker, who was a lovely lady, and she gave me so much opportunities in school. But basically she had so many rules, adapted rules that would help me play the game with able-bodied participants as well. So, for example, when we played other schools, if I touched the ball at any point, that was automatically my ball. So, for example, if I was going to intercept it and I didn't quite get there to catch it in time, but managed to touch it with my finger, then that would be my ball because she saw that as my interception. So that was really lovely. So that the ball got to me straight away. And then also a rule that also was brought in was no one was allowed to mark me because she didn't want people just standing in front of me and putting their hands up and just taking the ball away from me. So Mrs. Thomas was basically the start of my basketball career. We always say that because she found my love for sport really, and she got me into sport mainly. I then went on to secondary school, and secondary school I did all the same classes as everyone else was doing. So I did dance, but I maybe just adapted it slightly differently. I was quite forward thinking, and I did learn to adapt things quite quickly. I don't know if that was just in my nature of what I've been taught, or
do you think it's for you to put those kind of suggestions forward, or what was it that the teachers were kind of helpful and making adaptations, suggestions?
I think it's a bit of both. I've had a lot of people come to me recently saying, my school won't do this, my school won't do that, and they're not teaching me this, they're not adapting this. But I think it's actually down to the individual as well to have some forward thinking and to have some confidence and say, actually, no, can I do it like this? Or is it safe enough for me to do it like this? So I'm trying to think of another good example that I used to do.
What other sports have you participated in over your childhood? You've obviously mentioned netball and dance, and there are other things.
I used to do swimming at school. I used to go swimming at school, and that I was actually allowed by school to have half an hour earlier to go to the changing room to start changing, and so then I'd be changed ready in time for the session. And that usually ran into my break a little bit, which was fine. It wasn't the end of the world, but the TAs would then help me get changed, and I meant I could do swimming with the class, which was really cool opportunity. I would do badminton as usual in a PE lesson. I would just hit it with the shuttlecock as usual. There wasn't much adaptation needed for that. Basketball, I just joined in with my teammates just as usual. They were running, I was just wheeling. But my biggest one I always kind of tell people about is when we came to cross country. Now, when I was at cross country, it was in the day where we used to run out into the local area still and run around the local area. Now, my local area, it's flat, don't get me wrong, but it's not very easy to wheel on like thick grass or on pavements and things like that. So I was like, huh, this is a good job. I'm going to get out of this one. That's the one thing I did want to get out of. I didn't want to do cross country. So I felt really smug. I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do it, shame. And then my teacher came up to me. She was like, what do you mean? Of course you're doing it. I was like, but how, miss? Like, it's going to take me hours if I go out on the pavements, because it would have done. And I would have done it, but it would have taken me ages. She was like, no, you're going to run around the playground. So I wheeled round and round and round the playground as my cross country. And then when everyone else came back in, I kind of joined them and went to the finish line with them. And she said, you can have a friend to do it with you. So, of course, all my friends, I became quite popular at that point because none of them wanted to run around the local area. They just wanted to run around the playground with me. So that was a really good example of how the school didn't see me as any different. They still wanted me to do what everyone else was doing. It was just that was actually their adaptation that they made. It wasn't me. So I was really lucky that they did have some forward thinking like that.
And what would you say, what would you say are the benefits of engaging with physical activity in terms of your condition and how important it is or not important it is, shall we say, to engage?
In school or just in general?
Just throughout your childhood, let's say, how it's impacted on your condition.
So when I grew up, my parents didn't know if I was going to be sporty or not, and that's not something you can force upon someone. It was lucky enough that I did actually have an interest in sport, but I was really lucky enough to grow up near Stoke Mandeville, and that was a coincidence. When I was born, we didn't really know the meaning of Stoke Mandeville. It was just it became more apparent as I grew up. So I grew up 10 minutes down the road from Stoke Mandeville, and it wasn't until I was about 10 years old that I found out about Willpower, which is a sports charity at Stoke Mandeville, who try and get anyone with a spinal cord injury or a wheelchair user into sport. And I went to various junior camps that Stoke Mandeville ran, and these were week-long ones or these were weekend ones, and it was just an opportunity to try out lots of different sports in one go. So I tried out like table tennis, I tried out wheelchair rugby, wheelchair basketball, athletics, swimming. All those sports were kind of included in that week or weekends, and that was an amazing opportunity to try lots of different sports. But it was at that point I realized, well, not necessarily me realized, but my parents realized, was that sport's not only important for physical well-being and to keep nice and strong and fit and healthy, it's also really important for mental and social well-being. So for example, my mum wanted me to have both able-bodied groups of friends and disabled groups of friends, because she thought it was really important for me to have the disabled group of friends for me to talk to, and those are the ones who can relate to me and knew exactly what I was going through. For me to like go up to someone that, oh, do you have toileting accidents like this? And for them to be like, yes, I do. And it was like a bit of a revelation for me. It wasn't just me going through that at that point. Whereas that was something I couldn't talk to my able-bodied friends about, because it was just they wouldn't have understood that. So sport really helped that side of it as well. Not only did it help me keep nice, fit and strong and healthy, which helped with everyday things such as pushing, transferring, also keeping my weight down, because when I was younger, my parents used to carry me quite a lot at various places. It was just an easier situation. If we lived in a house, they would carry me upstairs. So it kept my weight down, and it was all just beneficial all around to keep nice and fit and healthy and physically active, but also had that social social well-being as well.
Ella, I'm just wanted to ask about your interaction with your peers, because your school sounds amazing and that they were so proactive in making it inclusive. Was the response that you got from your peers, the same? Were they really happy to, play netball slightly differently so that you could be included?
Yeah, once again, I was really lucky and none of them really batted an eyelid. I think once they're told at that age, they just kind of did it. They were like, oh, okay, not a problem. And like I was lucky because I know a lot of people have experienced comments from school such as that you're your health and safety risk and you can't take part in sport because of that and things like that. And I was really lucky I never experienced any of that, but I am very aware that it goes on. So I'm very aware I'm quite a unique case and that doesn't always happen. But I think it is a case of almost sitting down and reasoning with the school and just being like, but why shouldn't you have the same opportunities? And if there's a solution and is there a way around it that you can come to some sort of agreement? But yeah, my friends were, I mean, not many of my school friends were very sporty, but they were very happy to have me included. I also, for example, when I did rounders, that was always done on the field, and wheeling on a field in grass is really, really tricky. So what would happen with that is I'd be the batter and I'd hit the ball, and then I'd pick a friend who would then run for me. She'd run round. Obviously, I always pick the fastest friend, and she would super fast. So yeah, there is definitely ways that you can make it work, and yeah, hopefully be included in school lessons.
And you talk a lot about kind of within school, but you talk about how you were fortunate enough to have that nurturing environment, but for children that maybe don't have that, unfortunately don't have that school setting and that school support, how do you find things to engage with physical activity wise outside of the school setting?
Yeah, good question. So also just to add to the school sports thing, I know that Willpower have recently just started running a course for not necessarily designed straight like directly at teachers, but it's for anyone really. And it's a course that kind of helps give ideas and suggestions on how you can adapt PE lessons or things like that, or sports sessions, to make them more inclusive for disabled people. So if you've got at a school that is struggling with that, then you can point them in Willpower's direction, and these teachers can go on those courses. And
on that, I suppose people working within spinal units or spinal centres can start that process before discharge in terms of raising awareness, potentially signposting to that, so that when conversations are having place before the individuals return to school, those resources are known, and kind of the school can have kind of a thought process.
Absolutely. And I think it actually comes down to some teachers just not having the confidence, or just not having the knowledge. They've never needed the knowledge, so why would they necessarily know? And I know a lot of it seems common sense to a lot of us, but it's not for a lot of people. And if they can do a simple course like that, they might just start their brain ticking and be like, oh, actually, it's not that hard. I can think about it. I can do this. I can do that. And you can get things like, if you've got someone with less mobility, you can get things like balloons and play balloon tennis over a net and things like that. There's so many options that you can do to include people in sport. It's just having the ideas and having that knowledge.
So sorry, going back to my other question about how do you engage with things outside of school? How did you kind of come across what's available outside of that school setting?
For me, it was kind of, I went through my hospital a lot of the time. I kind of, I'm based under Stoke Mandeville, and in my ward, there was a lovely sister who had a husband who played wheelchair rugby, and she really, this is Bob's wife, and she really encouraged me to get involved in wheelchair rugby, but at the same time had that knowledge of disability sport background and kind of pointed me in the right direction of where to go. So if you are based under a spinal unit, then that might be a good option to start talking to your physios and see if they know anywhere that they can point you in the direction. And that's kind of slightly how I got to know Willpower. And Willpower have loads of different events on. Like I mentioned earlier, they'd have a if you're newly injured within the first year of injury, you can attend the Spinal Unit Games, which happen every September, and that's a week-long sports event, which is amazing. I go every year because I help out at it. But it's a week-long sports event where you stay around, you stay in the dormitories in the local by the stadium, and you try out loads of different sports all week. And whether you're sporty or not, it seems to be that everyone becomes really competitive in that week. Even if you're not sporty at all, they all want to win, and they all want to win the main prize as a spinal unit. So that's usually done as your spinal unit. So if you are newly injured, it might be worth inquiring into them whether you can attend that. If you're a young child, obviously, Stoke Mandeville will do like weekends, which are the National Junior Games, and they are usually in June. And this is all on their website, so you can definitely check them out. And that's a similar event. That's lots of different sports in one sports hall to try out all in one go. And at these sports, when you're trying them out, you can then talk to the national governing bodies, and you can find out where your local club is in your local area, and then take the sport on from there. So they are a really good starting point. If you don't have that, then a lot of national governing bodies have started to have their local club finders on their website, so you can type in your postcode and see where your local club is. The only downside with disability sport is it is quite sparse. And if you do want to take part in disability sport, you kind of have to be a little bit prepared to travel a little bit, and maybe go to a club that's an hour away from you instead of 5 minutes away from you. I used to go to university in Worcester, and I used to train with a team in Telford, which was an hour away from me, but it meant that I got the best possible training. And it's just, yeah, unfortunately, it does include travel.
And accessibility in terms of, when you're there, obviously, I've heard from some of my clients that, they go to a swimming session, or they go rowing, and it's all great because it's there and prepared and everything, but actually, like you say, getting there, or the lead up to it, or finding the equipment, would you say is a challenge? And how have you kind of overcome that when you've engaged in your various sports?
It is definitely a challenge, and there is barriers such as you mentioned, like finding money to buy equipment. For example, wheelchair basketball chairs are not cheap. And especially with children, there is a load of funding pots that are out there, and you can find grants that will help you buy this equipment. Willpower have a grant that you can apply for in order to put money towards equipment like this. So there is pots of money out there that you can use. And I don't know, there might also be pots of money out there that you can use for travel as well, which might help you afford petrol to go to these events and things like that. So it's definitely worth looking into charities and things like that, and just see if there's anyone that will then support you in your local area. But if you do want to know more about that, Willpower have a list. I'm not trying to big up Willpower too much, but they seem to be the organization that I know that really are pushing for sport at the moment, and they've got a whole funding page on their website, and you can apply for different grants.
I think we will let you give shout out to Willpower, because they do amazing work for everyone. Ella, one of the things we wanted to maybe touch on a little bit, going back now to sort of focusing on physical activity with children and young people. So your parents took the approach that they wanted you to get involved. They wanted you to have those experiences. I mean, have you ever had that conversation with your parents as to whether that was a little bit scary for them, seeing you maybe start doing sports, and whether they were ever concerned that you might get injured, and whether you've got any tips for parents who are maybe sitting there thinking, I want my child to get more active, but I'm a bit worried that, you know, it might put them at risk?
100%. I think for my dad, he strongly encouraged me to get involved in sport because I was the son that he never got to have. And I was the one that he was able to take to all these matches. I think originally he had in his head that he was going to be going to rugby matches with boys, but he never had any boys. So I was the son he never had, and we went to basketball matches together, and we traveled around the country. So I think my dad loved it, but I think for both of them, the disabled world was a complete unknown to them. Like, it can be quite daunting to walk into a whole sports hall full of wheelchairs, and there's just random like legs up against the wall, amputee legs that they've just prosthetic legs that they've just taken off and put everywhere, or there's various wheels, or there's people walking and then not walking, and then it's a minefield. It's a complete minefield, but also it's the most humbling experience they both found, and they both learned a lot from it. So I can understand it can be scary and daunting. And as for injury, I believe personally that we're no different to any able-bodied person taking part in sport. Like, we have just as much chance of injuring ourselves as any able-bodied person. So I think you've kind of got to take those risks in life. And if there is so many benefits, I think, that outweigh those kind of risks. So I think they're really beneficial to just get involved in sport. But the one thing I would love to add, if that's okay, is when I first started in GB. So when at the age of 16, I was first invited to go to my very first wheelchair basketball GB camp, which I thought was pretty terrifying and hilarious at the same time, because I didn't think I could even play wheelchair basketball at that point. I was fairly new to the sport, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and got invited to a GB camp. So all of a sudden, I found myself in this room full of about 20 GB women players, all talking about London 2012, because it was in the lead up. So about 6 months before London 2012 happened. Quite a daunting process, I must say. And I went to a camp for the weekend, and it was the longest weekend of my life, I think. We had so many training sessions. It was very physically tough, because obviously you can imagine at that elite level, you're training really hard. I remember my mum just kept texting me saying, how are you getting on? Are you okay? And I'd be like, I can't feel my arms, and I've got 4 more sessions left, but yeah, all good. But that camp will always stick with me, because it taught me life skills more than anything. Yes, I learned about the sport, I learned how to play a bit more, but my main biggest learning curve for that session, that whole weekend, was life skills. So I went along to this camp, and I didn't know how to transfer into my basketball chair on my own. Until that point, my mum had always been there to like hold my legs, so they didn't go flying when I transferred into my chair. So I suddenly got to this camp and realized, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to do this on my own. Watched around, everyone else is doing it on their own. So I thought, I've got to do this. And of course, the first time I did it, I completely fluffed it up and ended up on the floor. And I completely missed my chair. So I ended up on the floor, but obviously didn't want to tell anyone or admit anyone that I'd done that. So I was on the floor pretending I was fixing my wheel at the front of my chair, my caster wheel. And the GB coach came up to me. She was very, very lovely. She she was actually a high level injury like me, because it's quite unusual in the GB team, basketball team. And she came up to me, she's like, "You all right?" And I was like, "Yeah, fine, I'm just fixing my caster." And she goes, "You fluffed up your transfer, didn't you?" I was like, "No." She was like, "You did, didn't you?" I was like, "Yes." She was like, "Do you need help getting up?" And I was like, "I can't get up." So at that point, some of the other coaches came and helped me up. And it just kind of made me realize that it was okay to do those things, and it was okay to not know how to transfer. And that's where I learned. I had other people then come over and show me, and that this is how I do it. It might not work for you, but give it a go. And also I was 16 at that point, and we aren't provided transport from hotel to venue. I had to speak up and ask the girls if I could get a lift with one of them and things like that. So that gave me life communication skills. And it just meant I couldn't be shy and introverted. I had to speak up about my problems. I had to share rooms with other teammates. So I had to learn how to deal with my toileting in front of them and things like that. So yeah,
which is quite hard if you're naturally not a person that wants to speak up or wants to draw attention to yourself. So that is quite challenging to be.
massively, and it was massively daunting. But then what I did learn is I had 12 other people that I could talk to and ask advice of, which was hugely invaluable. So it meant that I learned so much. I learned how do you get into the car? How do you then get your wheelchair into the car if you're on your own? I watched them. I learned all these tips and tricks, and I learned about the buying a car process. How do you get onto mobility? How do you then get your car, and how do you drive? How do you get the hand controls on? And then how do you wheel your luggage around, as well as wheeling your chair and your basketball chair and everything. It was, yeah, I do believe that wheelchair basketball didn't only make me a better athlete, it made me a better person and gave me life skills.
And I mentioned in the introduction, you run your online exercise classes, which I'm going to share a link to. And I know that they're hugely successful, popular, demanding, some of my clients say. What's the what was the purpose of those, and kind of your vision for those, and how could they help support either children that are listening or families of those that support children?
Yeah, so I've got a YouTube channel called Ella's Wheelchair Workouts, and this was a channel I started purely in lockdown. I genuinely thought it would be like a 6 weeks venture. 6 weeks venture, which has now turned into 4 years later, still doing it. So it's been very worthwhile. But basically what I do is when I was in lockdown, I was really, really missing the gym. I used to like going to the gym a lot, keeping fit in myself. And obviously in lockdown, we didn't have that. We were all shut at home. And I was looking at my sister, who was doing Joe Wicks every day. My mum was doing Joe Wicks with her. And I just thought, well, is there anything out there for disabled people? Is there anything out there? Because I tried to do some of Joe Wicks and some things were good, but I didn't really feel like I'd had a proper workout from it. So I looked online. I decided to look on YouTube and see if there's anything out there for disabled people. And don't get me wrong, there were a few videos on there which were good, but I just didn't feel that inspired by them. So I'd wanted to learn to edit for work anyway, because I'm in the media industry for work. So I decided to film my own video and put it online, because I thought if I'm struggling, there's going to be other people out there struggling too in a similar situation. And I'm very, very aware that not everyone has at home loads of equipment. They don't have dumbbells just lying around. They don't have barbells lying around or whatever. It's just not something you always have, especially in lockdown. So my focus of these videos was to do adaptive workouts that were either no equipment at all, or using household equipment that was around your house. So for example, if you didn't have weights, then I've included tins of beans or something like that. So they're not too heavy, but also if you want to make it heavier, you can use bottles of water, or if you really want to go wild, go with flour and they're slightly heavier, things like that. So and also I found a broom is a really good exercise tool as well. So a lot of my videos include a broom in, or if we're doing things with resistance bands, then I've also suggested a pair of old tights are a good substitute as well. So I was trying to make it accessible for all. And I was trying to give children and adults a space and something that they could do in lockdown as well to keep them nice and fit and healthy.
Great idea.
As I said, it was 6 weeks, and then 4 years later, I'm still doing them. I do various classes for various different charities a week. So I do one for Willpower on a Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. And that's really nice because that's done on Zoom, so I can see everyone's faces, and we have a little chat in beforehand, and people ask questions about anything really. Like there was a travel little one person was going traveling this week, so they wanted to know about something in Madrid and things like that. And then I do a session live on Facebook for a company called Gym Possible based in Newcastle. I do that once a week on a Friday. So there's various sessions that I do. But also I then wanted some more backing of my own knowledge. I studied sports coaching at university, but over lockdown, I decided to do a personal training degree. So I studied as a personal trainer, wanting to specialize in disability. And I qualified for that. So I now feel like I've really backed myself, and I've got enough knowledge to continue this, and hopefully maybe have another, when my career, if it ever breaks down, then I've got another backup. But
I mean, whenever I talk to you, Ella, I always think, how do you find time for all of this? But anyway, that's another topic for another day. A more difficult question. Maybe what would you say is one of the biggest challenges you've faced in terms of physical activity? And then I suppose a subsidiary to that is, how did you overcome it, and what advice would you give to those listening?
There's been various challenges along the way, don't get me wrong. A big one that you can experience for a sport like swimming and things like that would be like toileting challenges. And how do you overcome them it's really tricky. It's kind of working with your spinal unit in order to find some solutions. But it might be that some days you can't go swimming because you don't feel safe enough that you won't have an accident and things like that. And that's okay. I think the thing is, don't put too much pressure on yourself that you've got to go swimming every week because that's what your training scheme says, or that's what your coach says. I think it's fine if you can't go that week. It's not a problem. It's not going to hurt your body because you're then going to be able to go again another week. So it's being kind on yourself and reading your body. There's some times where I'm literally simply just too exhausted to go and do anything. I didn't go to rugby last week because I was just too tired and things like that. So I think it's okay. It's listening to your body and knowing that actually you don't have to go every week, and no one's telling that you even have to go. But yeah, physical activity is definitely really beneficial on your body and mental, as we stated earlier. But lots of different challenges. I mean, there was challenges when I started learning to drive. It was like challenges such as, how am I going to get my wheelchair basketball chair in the car on my own if I went to tournaments without my dad? My rugby chair, I still can't lift in the car on my own. I have to ask our various helpers or coaches to help me lift my rugby chair in the boot. And that can all be daunting. I completely understand that, but it's being polite and open and talking to people and communicating with people and knowing when it's okay to just ask if you need help. And that is really hard. That you've got to be brave, but you've just got to learn to recognize that it is possible if you want to speak up and communicate.
Great. And the rugby that you do, the wheelchair rugby, I'm not sure if it's the same for the basketball, but that's mixed teams, isn't it? And levels of disability are completely varied as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's similar for basketball as well. But yeah, wheelchair rugby, actually the levels of injury are a lot higher in wheelchair rugby. And I've found that really humbling because I'm one of the more able players in wheelchair rugby, which I'm not in basketball. So going along to wheelchair rugby, I was incredibly humbled at how hard some of these players work, and they're still super quick, super fast, super good at catching with how little movement and function that they have. So it is incredibly impressive. And yeah, I mean, I love being on the wheelchair rugby team because I think I'm one of like 4 girls. So we're surrounded by a lot of men, but the banter is very good, very funny. And yeah, we have a good laugh.
I know I saw on your socials recently that actually at one of the tournaments you went to, the Stoke Mandeville Maulers were able to put on an all female starting lineup, which I thought was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it was a great achievement for us because, like I said, it's a very male dominated sport, and a lot of the other teams only have like one female in their team, if even that. So the fact we could put up a full female lineup of 4 players, everyone was very impressed and very jealous of us.
And why do you think that you have more women on the team? Is that just because of accessibility? Is that because of more knowledge? Like, how, why is it that
I mean, our chairman and our coach are very, very good at pestering people and encouraging people to come along to our sessions in a good way. Don't worry, they're not like stalkerish or anything. But they're really good at like actually going out and finding people and saying, come along, you'd really enjoy it, have a go. I think Ian worked on me for about 2 years before I went on to rugby. So he never gave up. He was very determined. But I'm thankful he did, because I found a new sport that, really opened my eyes even more. So I think that's partly helps, but also I think sometimes wheelchair rugby is advertised in the wrong way. It's advertised as murderable, because that's what it used to be called. And that can be quite brutal, and that can be really off-putting to a lot of people. Yes, it's a violent sport, but it's not as violent as people think. And until you're in the sport and realize that yourself, it can be quite off-putting, I think, especially hearing the crash of the chairs. It's quite a lethal sound. So I think,
and I suppose you've got to, if you're in a unit, you've got to kind of get exposure to as many different things and find what you feel that you're most suited to and what you potentially can excel at or find your niche area.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I'm trying to that's what I'm trying to say in this whole webinar. I'm not trying to force people into sport, because I completely understand sport is not for everyone. As you mentioned, I do 1 day a week in the spinal unit at Slow Mandeville, and I do my workouts there, and I get a lot of patients that hate sport, and that's absolutely fine. I'm not going to push them into doing it. My job there is just to encourage them to do some sort of physical activity, whether that's 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes a week, just some sort of physical activity which will benefit you in your wheeling. It will benefit you in your transferring. It will help you when you have to lift your chair into the car on your own at that age. It will help you just build up your strength in general. And I think that's really important, because that then helps your mental well-being as well, and gets you out of the house and keeps you active, and you meet other people and you see other people and you talk to other people, which is really important. So I'm not saying you have to go join a rugby club at this point or a basketball club. Just if you want to go to your local gym, go have a chat with them. There might be things that you can't do, but there's usually at gyms, there's always free weights that you can lift up and do yourself, or there's resistance bands. Or buy a set of dumbbells and you can do my workouts at home if you're not.
Or a tin of beans or a broom.
Exactly. There's plenty of options. So yeah.
And I suppose having that experience from early on in your injury journey, so that then it becomes kind of commonplace. It's not something as scary as going to the gym and lifting some dumbbells or playing with a broom, because you've kind of done that before in OT or physio sessions. I know later on in this webinar series we're hearing from OTs and physios, so having that exposure and that education earlier on in your journey probably helps.
Absolutely. And as I've said, it's not all smooth riding. There will be challenges and there will be barriers that you face, but if you are in that network of sporting or disabled sports people, then you can have someone to talk to and say, actually, did you ever face this barrier? How did you get over it? And how did you overcome it? And people will be there to give advice and ask anytime. Like, I'm more than happy to talk to anyone if anyone wants to contact me after this and just answer any questions, because that's the only way you learn, is by talking to other people.
Yeah, that's very kind. Someone has asked a question, sorry, Victor, which is, thank you for your amazing talk, firstly. And looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self as you navigated the complexities of growing up with a spinal injury, both personally and in your career in sports?
Oh, that is a very good question. Do you know what? I don't know if I'd even change anything. I think my advice to younger me would have been just to be a bit more confident than I was. And I know that's hard to channel and get right, but it's like to trust the process a bit more and be that confident that it's gonna work out. Like when I went to that DB camp, I was terrified, but if I'd have gone in there confidently and talking to people and asking them questions, then I think I would have learned a lot more, a lot quicker. But yeah, I know I really don't think I'd change much of my journey. Like I said, I've had lovely support. But I think it's okay to ask for help if you need it.
And would you say, can you think of an instance where you haven't asked for help and you've regretted it?
Within sport or not?
Let's go within sport.
Okay. The one where I transferred, I should have asked for help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the basketball.
And then one out of sport is when I started driving, various people always come up to me in the car and ask if I need help putting my chair in the car, which is absolutely lovely, don't get me wrong. But I've got into a habit now, I put my chair in a really specific way. So if someone helps, it actually really disrupts it sometimes. And I'm not being rude at that point. I just say, thank you very much, but I'm all right. I've got it, but thank you. And a lot of the time they then stand there and then they watch me and see how I do it. And they're like, can I just have a look? And I'm like, of course. So, and in that instance, I think it's really good and important to educate people. But there's been times where I have been offered help and I haven't taken help. And for example, once I parked in a car park which had a slight hill. And I got out of my chair into my car and I'd completely forgotten to put my brakes on my chair. And so my chair just rolled down the hill. It was an empty car park. And I thought, oh no. And then there was no one around at that point. I couldn't ask anyone to go get my chair. So I was like, what am I going to do? So I ended up getting in my car, driving my chair. But then it really tests your driving because you have to position your car really strategically so that when you open the door, you can still reach your chair and get it. So it really tested my driving. And I texted my sisters at that point, in which they thought it was hilarious, obviously. So got it eventually, got back in and off I went again. But that took me about half an hour longer than it was planned to. So
another question that I've got for you is, obviously you were injured at birth, so all that you've ever known is kind of life in a chair. And do you think your kind of perception, kind of how you react to things, is different compared to, obviously you've been exposed to so many different people through your sporting career, and do you think your outlook is different compared to the other people who maybe were, let's take rugby for example, playing able-bodied rugby beforehand, and now do you find that they want to do the same sports that they were doing before, or that kind of they've maybe changed vision into a different sport?
yeah, that's a really good point actually. Because I was paralyzed from birth, my mum and I always say that I don't know what I'm missing, which I think is really valuable actually, because I've always just learned up how to do things like wheeling a wheelchair. I learned to wheel instead of walk and things like that. And
yeah,
and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just I've learned things differently, but at the same time, I haven't been through trauma. I haven't been anything like that. I was just literally, that was my trauma, was being born, which was fine. So I always count myself very, very lucky to be in that situation. But yeah, I've got friends who have been injured, but a lot of the time they are doing completely different sports to what they were doing beforehand. And I don't know if that's just to have a completely fresh new start and new change. But I do know people that were in an individual sport before and have decided to go into a team sport this time, purely to have that support of your teammates around you and have those people to ask those questions to and things like that. And I know people who, so for example, I know one girl, she used to do netball beforehand, and then that's when she transitioned into wheelchair basketball because that was the most similar sport that she could find. So I think it's personal preference at that point. If you want to do a sport that is similar to what you did before and have those memories of your life before accident, then that's great. But if you want to have a completely fresh start and do something completely different, that's also fine. It's just personal preference.
Right. And one final question before we let you go. You've mentioned kind of tools or resources available. So just to recap, for those listening who maybe want further information, obviously you very kindly said that you're a point of contact. So that's very kind, thank you. But Willpower, obviously your online exercise classes, anything else?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm more than happy to talk to people. So if you ever want to contact me on the social medias, I'm usually under Ella Archer or Ella Beaumont. I've just got married, so kind of in between two names at the moment. And Willpower's website is hugely helpful. Like I said, they've got funding page on there, and options to join our online workouts that I do as well, and also some videos online that you can do of exercising at home, a bit like my videos. There's my YouTube channel, which you're more than welcome to go onto and follow wheelchair workouts on there. There's also companies such as Invictus Active. They've got a very clever wheelchair rollers that they supply, and obviously you buy them, but they're it's a bit like, you know, when you roll on bikes, you wheel up onto it on a ramp, and then you can do static rolling on wheelchair rollers that they've created, which is amazing. And I do a session for them on a Monday evening on Zoom, which is good fun. And then there's a company called Gym Possible, who are based in Newcastle, and they are aiming to be a fully adaptive gym. In fact, they are a fully adaptive gym. They've got an adaptive hub up in Newcastle, but I understand not everyone's in Newcastle, so they have a lot that is online, and they do online workout classes, and they post a video every day of the week, which you can do at home. And then there's companies, if you want a bit more of a, I don't know, like a bit more adventurous sport like water skiing or snow skiing, then companies such as Access Adventures, they do a lot of those more extreme sports, I guess.
Heart racing.
Yeah, exactly. They've got Access Adventures actually have a hub based at Heron Lake, just off the M25 near Heathrow, and they've got a disability sports hub there, and they do water skiing, they do kayaking, then they do camps throughout the summer. So it's definitely worth signing up for one of them if you want to do sports like that. And then Backup also run a lot of different Backup runs some like activity adventure weekends for children, which I went on when I was younger. But they also run a ski week where you can go skiing with them, and you can do that as a beginner. So there's loads of options out there. But asking for knowledge and advice, companies like that, like Willpower, are really helpful because they'll be able to point you in the right direction. Oh, and finally, sorry, just coming to me. National governing bodies are also a really good place to start. So, for example, if you're wanting to get into British athletics, then just go on the British Athletics Disability Sports website, and there will be a club finder on there where you can find out where your local club is. And then you can maybe contact them and ask, well, express your interest of trying out a different sport. So.
Great, that was super informative.
That was a lot. Sorry that I feel like I've thrown a lot at you all. So thank you very much. But yeah, feel free to contact me anytime.
Well, I think that probably brings us to the end of the webinar today, almost spot on time. So thank you, Ella, for joining us today, for being so honest about your experiences. I think some of the stories that you've told, I think it's really important that, you know, the idea that you, as you say, fluffed your transfer and were trying to pretend that you were fixing your wheel. There's probably a lot of people who can actually really resonate with that. So thank you. We have another session planned for next week, which I'm going to do a little shout out for. So next week, we are going to be looking at the parents' perspective. So we'll be having some parents joining us. So we would encourage everybody to come along for that as well. Otherwise, that just leaves us to say thank you again, Ella, for spending your time with us today.
No, I mean, thank you for listening to me for so long. And sorry, I talk really quick, but there's often a lot of information I want to get out. So thank you for persevering.
No, it was great, Ella. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.